Whenever you are making homemade jam or bottling fruit or anything like that, there's always waste that's left over, such as your peels or your pits, your cores, things like that. These are valuable things that you can still use. So don't just throw them in the trash. I'm going to show you how to make some syrup that you can use for pancakes, waffles, or you can put as drink flavorings. You can do it in baking, so many different things. And it's made with the scraps, the peels and the pits and the cores and the things that you would normally throw away. It's a great way to get more use out of your fresh fruit. So get one more use out of it, and it's awesome. I love it. We do this every time we have fruit. So for this particular video, we are doing peach mango. So I was making some peach mango jam, and as you can see, we kept a bowl there with our peels. Once we had all our peels, just put them in the crock pot. The other great thing about this is usually when you're canning, you get so tired. And this is something that gives you an extra day or two. So you're not going to be doing it all at the same day as you're doing your jam. Fill your crock pot with water. So you can see I just have enough to fill it with water. Put the skins and the mango seeds. There always has a lot of mango on those seeds. Sit it in the crock pot for a couple of days. This buys you time. I will do anywhere from 1 to 3 days on keep warm or low. And just stir it every once in a while. That's it. But it sits in the background. It's not something that takes a lot of work or effort. Just let it do its thing while you're doing other things. After a few days or whenever you have some time, you're going to use your cheesecloth. So cheesecloth is basically a very fine strainer. So what we want to do is we want to strain the fruit out of the water. So now it's been slowly and cooking on low for a few days. So all the water has absorbed all of the fruit, the flavor and nutrients and everything like that from these peels. And so at this point, it's juice. It's basically your flavored water is what you have right here. Some people do this process to make like homemade apple cider, and you absolutely could do that. You just want to strain all your peels out. So using the cheesecloth, it does a finer strain because you don't want like a lot of chunks and the fibers of the fruit in there, and preferably have a strainer that fits your bowl. I probably should have used a smaller bowl here a little bit, but that's okay. I wanted to make sure I had enough room in the bowl to fit all the juice. I've also put my strainer or colander over a pitcher. Sometimes that works. It just depends on how much you're making. But I mean, it's really super, super simple. Like I said, people will do this with the apple peels, and then at this point, they would use the water. After they strain it, they would use that to turn into apple cider, add a little sugar and their cloves or cinnamon or whatever they want. It's a great way to make apple cider real cheap with essentially your scraps you were going to throw away. And you can still give your scraps after this point. After we strain them, we still give the scraps to the chickens. So we're literally wasting as little as possible. We are getting as much use out of them as we can. And so once you have this all strained, they're pretty hot coming out of the crock pot here, and you can let it cool. You can do whatever. Sometimes I usually let it strain for about a day. And again, it just depends on my time. But if you're wanting to get it done, you can manually squeeze out as much of the juice as you can. And we usually do that anyway after we've let it sit. But pulling it out of the crock pot is pretty hot, so it usually needs at least a few hours to cool off anyway. You're not going to want to squeeze it a whole lot because it's hot. And so once you squeeze it out, you've got all that juice and the flavored water basically that you can turn into a syrup. And so that's what we're going to do for this. The peach mango syrup is one of my most requested items that I can. And it's fabulous on pancakes, waffles, or you can do a drink. What I prefer to do, especially if you're doing this in summer and might have flies or things like that, I just take the ends of the cheesecloth and wrap it up. And sometimes that kind of helps disperse the juice a little bit. Sometimes the strainer gets clogged up and you just kind of have to move it around a little bit. And it doesn't hurt to kind of move it and squeeze the cheesecloth a little bit so that it's allowing it to drain as best as you can. Because you want it to drain. You want to get as much of the liquid as possible out of those peels. You could also at this point run it through the peels and things through like an apple saucer. You wouldn't be able to do the mango seeds necessarily, but the peels you could run through an apple saucer and then separate the sauce from the juice. And that's another way that's going to get a lot more of the liquid out for you. I just didn't want to worry about that right now. So you see you've got the juice in the bottom there. Once you've got all the juice separated, I just put it in a pitcher. And again, I didn't have time to deal with it, so I put the pitcher in a fridge. That's fine. You can. This is so you can take as much time as you want to make this. It's really around your schedule, which is what makes it so easy. Now, what's important is as you're ready to make your syrup, you want to measure how much of the juice that you have because you want your sugar to juice ratios. So if you don't like an extremely sweet syrup, you want to do like a 1-to-1 ratio. So 1 cup of sugar for every 1 cup of juice. And then depending on how thick you want the syrup to be, you can cook it down to, I would say cook it down to at least 25%. So let's say once I have all the sugar in the juice, let's say this is sitting at 4 quarts, you'd want to boil it and cook it down to about 3 quarts. If you want a little bit thicker syrup, you can either add more sugar or you could cook it down to like half. Either way will give you a thicker sugar or a thicker syrup. So that's where it's just it becomes a chemistry kind of science act to it there. And it's just kind of a you can try it and a trial and error thing, see how much you like it. If after you can it, if it's still too thin, you're not adding pectin or anything to this. This is just sugar and juice, and that's how you're getting the syrup. So if your syrup is too thin, you can always cook it down a little bit more from your jars, or pour it out of the jar when you're ready to use it and cook it a little bit, and it'll thicken right up. So it's basically because it's sugar and juice, it's just basically the water content in the juice determines how thin or thick it is. So once you have it cooked down, put it in your jars. And I always do the syrups in quart jars just because it goes further. And usually it just seems like you're wanting to add more syrup. Jams and things, we put them in pints because you don't go through a lot of jams. But typically when you're putting syrup on pancakes or in a drink or something, you're going to use more of it. So I always put them in the pint or in the quart jars. And as you can see, I have my little helper there. It's the same process as when you're canning anything. You fill the jar and you want to wipe down the rim of the jar with a wet paper towel and make sure you don't have any sugars on there so that the jar will seal properly. Very important to wipe down the top. And then once you have the top wiped down, put your lid and your ring on, and then it's ready to go in the water bath canner. These are perfectly fine to do in a water bath canner. They'll be shelf stable, but then once they're opened, they'll have to be kept in the refrigerator. Just, it's fine. Because they're fruit. Now normal, like maple syrup, I know maple syrup is shelf stable even once it's open. But because this has the fruit, I always keep it in the fridge. It might be okay on the shelf, so if it gets left out overnight, it's probably okay. I would just recommend once it's opened, keep it in the fridge for the best quality and the longest lasting shelf life. Pretty simple, and it's super simple. You can do these syrups like this. We've also made lemonades with them, and it makes a really good lemonade. So here's a jar that we already had in the fridge, that we always keep a jar in the fridge because we use it a lot. So since I had enough, not quite to fill another jar, I'm just going to top off the one that we had in our fridge, and you can do that. That's fine. It's adding the old syrup to the new syrup. It's not gonna hurt anything. And we didn't have quite enough to fill another jar to process. So we just do that, and then that way anytime we make jam or syrup or anything like that, if we have extra that's not quite enough to fill a jar, we put it in our fridge to use right away, and then you don't have to process it and go through all that when you're going to be using it. So water bath canning. You have your canner, get your water hot, and the syrup is hot, so it's fine. Put it right in. So the main thing, now we only ended up with 3 quart jars for this. I wasn't making a ton this time, and that's fine. You just, in order to process it, you want to have your water at least an inch above the tallest jars. So if we had pints in there, whatever, the tallest jar, you want to have at least an inch of water above. So I started to fill it. Then I remembered I had pickled green beans to make, so I just combined them. And there you go. You can get the recipe in the link below.